Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Disaster Recovery Week with the Greater Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce. My name is Nancy Pelton and I'm President and CEO. We have a fabulous week of events and I hope you have checked out some of them that we have. You can always look back at all of them if you miss any. This is brought to you in conjunction with the City of Palm Bay. We believe that businesses need to plan ahead of time and be prepared for what's coming, what could come. I think we all know that we're in hurricane season, so we want to make sure that you're thinking about your business and how to make sure you mitigate any damage that might come along. We really want to thank our presenting sponsor, which is PRC, Property Renovations and Construction. They have been fabulous, and we certainly appreciate their stepping up to sponsor the entire week. We also have our speaker sponsors, 5-Star Claims Adjusting, State Farm and Viera Voice, and then our gold sponsors, Morsecom and ServPro. So today we are speaking with Sandra Urban. She is the Special Projects Manager, Community and Economic Development with the City of Palm Bay. And as I hope all of you know, Palm Bay is the largest city in Brevard County. It is like the second largest city in Central Florida. And you can imagine how much work will go into planning for a city of that size. So we are thrilled to have Sandra with us. So Sandra, if you can give us a brief introduction of yourself and let us know a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into some questions about how the city plans for any kind of business interruption.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on here. My name is Sandra Urban. I do work for the City of Palm Bay. I have been in the Special Projects Manager role for almost 3 years. I worked at Brevard County for 9 years and a nonprofit for 1.5 years. I have a master's in public administration from Florida State University and with a certification in emergency management. So emergency management is something that's really near and dear to me, and I feel that residents and businesses can really benefit from planning and knowing as much as they can to be prepared.
Excellent. So how does the city plan for emergency management? I mean, it's, like I said, the largest city. There's so much that you would have to consider. So what does the city do to plan for emergencies?
Well, the first thing that a city should really do to be prepared is to have a really good comprehensive emergency management plan and a good continuity of operations plan in place. And the city of, between the two of them, I think that it's really, they kind of feed off of each other. They're two different plans, but they work a lot in conjunction. So our comprehensive emergency management plan takes into account what our city profile looks like, our demographics, our characteristics, our geography, because that profile really helps the city to be able to get an idea of what our needs are and make it really specific, because every jurisdiction is different, every geography is different. The city, one of the things that we're really prone to besides hurricanes is floods, and that may not be something that you would find in another jurisdiction. The continuity of operations plan, I feel, is also really important because that serves as a resource to all of our departments. It identifies the essential functions of each department, who is assigned to each of those functions. What are your delegations of authority and your lines of succession for those functions? What tools and resources do you need to do that? And a lot of times the continuity of operations plan is in place in case you are not able to operate out of your main facility. But as we've seen with COVID-19, you can still operate out of your same facility, but you're operating much differently than you were in just a normal operations. And both of those plans are a big collaborative effort between all city departments. It's not just one person writing it. And I also feel that that's something that should be updated every year, and it's something that businesses should do as well. When I work on these plans, I don't view them as a plan that's collects dust on the shelf. It's something that is updated every year, every incident, and I work collaboratively with other departments, and I think businesses should take a similar approach.
I think for a lot of businesses, they're unsure where to start and how to get help. So what's the city's role in helping local businesses before an incident occurs?
Well, I feel like one of the best ways that a city or a business can recover from an incident is to prepare ahead of time. And I think that an event like this with the Disaster Recovery Expo and Disaster Recovery Week is a really great tool. Businesses should connect with all the resources that they may need, not only before, but during and after an incident, and making those partnerships. One of the things we say in the emergency management world is you make those relationships during blue skies, not gray skies. So it sounds a little cheesy, but knowing who you're going to need to connect with afterwards, and that preparation really helps make recovery a lot quicker and a lot easier on a business.
I think that's so true. We are trying with the Expo to let people have checklists to be able to go through and see how their business would fare, and make sure that if they're not prepared in certain areas, that they take the time to think about it and put a plan together. But also to learn about businesses that are out there that, should there be any problems, they can help with mitigation and understanding who they need to connect with. So that's just perfect. So what's the city's role in helping local businesses then recover? So, I know that you actually did a lot during COVID, and we sent out a lot of information for the Back to Business, listing that you were allowing all the businesses to put their information on the city's website. But what are some of the things that you do to help businesses recover from disasters?
I feel like one of the biggest things that we can do is be a liaison to the businesses. So our communications team does an excellent job of coordinating all the different resources outside of the city and outside of that businesses may be aware of, and taking that information on what the city's doing, what other agencies such as the U.S. Small Business Administration is doing, the Federal Emergency Management Agency is doing, and taking all that and putting it together in one location where all businesses can find it in one-stop shop, and kind of help bring all those resources together. The city also coordinates with businesses to link them with private and public funding. We work with local business industry support organizations to do those assessments, damage assessments, whether it's physical damage, employment, lost revenue. If it's also necessary, we will work with the Emergency Operations Center for Brevard County and request the Florida Small Business Emergency Bridge Loan. And we've also discussed opening up business recovery centers throughout the city if there is such a need. And that will also be a really good place where we can have businesses come to get the resources that they need to recover from an incident.
That's fabulous. I know after some of the hurricanes, there definitely was a need. They had water distribution centers and food, so that's terrific. What about specifically for COVID? What are some of the things that the city has done to assist businesses through this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, COVID-19 has been a very interesting response. We're used to hurricanes, we're used to flooding, we're used to severe weather, and a pandemic is not something that the city is really used to. So communications through our social media and through our webpage have been a vital tool to connect businesses to information that they need. And I know that I have to give a shout out to our city's communications team. They have done such an excellent job on taking the vast amount of information that's out there and bringing it together in one cohesive place where businesses can get it. I know they did a big Our Palm Bay campaign up and running. It's the Open Up and Recovery campaign, and that's where they focused on a business impact survey, a business reopening needs assessment survey. We also, like you said, we published a back to business directory so the residents can know which businesses are open, and waivers and accommodations, what are some of the reopening best practices, and how to follow CDC guidelines for opening up your business. Outside of our communications team, our building division had to put together information on outdoor dining, and that was new, and they expedited that process. I know our former city manager also participated in a chamber chat with the Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce, and our economic development director also participated in a virtual reopening ribbon cutting. I know that our Community and Economic Development Director, Joan, has also worked with the county through the CARES funding, and that was getting, and I know you were there too, to help local businesses and small businesses get the personal protective equipment or the PPE that they need, because this is, no one's used to having to open up with masks or gloves or sanitizing a lot more than you're used to. So we tried to work with the county to get that funding to help local businesses be able to open up safely and as soon as possible.
So if people wanted to access this information, can you do a shout out for your website and your Facebook page and any other resources that you would like to, provide so that they know who to contact at the city?
Sure. So our main website is www.palmbayflorida.org. It's all spelled out. You can also go to our Facebook page, City of Palm Bay City Government. And I know that they post up on a regular basis. So not only COVID-19, but like you said, we are in hurricane season, and operating during a hurricane season and COVID-19 is a very unique situation. So those are two really good places where you can find information. Brevard County government also has information on a regular basis, but I know our communications team is very busy as well.
Absolutely. And yes, they have been fabulous. We share information that they send to us. And I always tell people to follow Greater Palm Bay Chamber, just because we always post from all different organizations, because we're kind of like the melting pot where we get things from the EDC and the tourist office and from, the city of Palm Bay, and we have things from the business community and from the US Chamber and the Florida Chamber and the National Chamber. It's like all the information kind of filters through, so they don't have to look in all those other locations. They can look through the chamber at one spot. So we certainly appreciate all that the city does. Is there anything else that you want to share with people or businesses that are out there that, may be of help to them, or something they haven't considered? Like I said, I think for those that were prepared, that actually thought about their plan B, if they weren't able to work in their offices, I think they were able to pivot quite quickly after COVID struck, and they were like, okay, we're closing our business, let's work from home. But for those that kind of were hesitant or hadn't really thought this through, it took longer, and business interruption can be a huge problem for businesses reopening or continuing successfully. So any kind of closing remarks or anything else you'd like to share, Sandra?
I think that's when it comes to checklists, the continuity of operations plan, I would really stress that, because that is where you're going to do your risk assessment of what are some of your business's vulnerabilities, what are you more susceptible to, and that's going to differ depending on the type of business that you have. And that will also allow you to identify who is doing what do they need in order to be able to do that. And if you can't operate out of your main office, that telework is really important to kind of know, all right, do you have to telework? And then do you have the proper setup? Do you have a VPN that you have to worry about? Do you have enough connectivity? Do you have the laptop? Does somebody need a loaner phone? Or how are you going to be able to communicate with your employees if they're not in the office, or if they're not in your place of business that's typical for them? So it's preparation. I can't stress enough how important that is. That's really going to, the more you do on the front end, the less likely you have to do on the back end of it. So just, I know that you're going to be having someone throughout this week that's going to be talking about checklists and continuity, business continuity plans. And it's actually very similar to what the city is doing. And so I would stress, take the time to do it, to go through, because that's really going to help you on the end.
That's perfect. We're actually having an insurance session as well. I think a lot of businesses don't realize the different types of insurance that are out there, what they need to look at in their policies, and just making sure that they're updated. Sometimes they get a policy 15 years ago and they've made all kinds of improvements to their buildings and their offices, and they have a lot more equipment. And so to make sure that they're covering all that could be lost if there was a total loss. So kind of important things that we want all our businesses to look at, homeowners as well, because sometimes the value of the homes rise and they still have a policy from 15 years ago and they have not increased the values that they want to be covering. And we know that homes are just more expensive to build now. So you want to make sure that you have that covered in your policy. So just one of the many things we'll be covering this week. We also have Chris Benona, who was talking about hurricanes and actually did a very nice presentation about the weather and showing the graphics and the different hurricanes that have come through here and how fortunate Brevard County has been. So a lot of interesting topics this week to join us with. 10 o'clock every day from the 20th to the 24th, but you can see the replays on the Chamber website and on our Facebook page. So I really want to thank Sandra Urban. She is the Special Projects Manager, Community and Economic Development for the City of Palm Bay. My name is Nancy Peltonen. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce. And a shout out to our presenting sponsor, which is PRC, Property Renovations and Construction, for sponsoring this week of Disaster Recovery Expo Week. So thank you, Sandra, for joining us. And we hope for our viewers that you watch the rest of the week or watch one of the programs that you may have already missed. So thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Hi guys, my name's Rich with PRC, providing hurricane preparedness tips for this storm season. When preparing for a storm, you have three main water points of intrusion: your roof, your soffits, and windows and doors. In preparing for this, you want to give a thorough inspection of your roof and soffits. If your soffits are blown out or missing, you can have wind lift and unnecessary pressures on your roof. Your roof and the condition of the overall shape on top, where shingles blow off, tiles can blow off, metal panels can be removed, and they can be projectiles towards neighbors' homes as well as your own. Windows and doors are known as silent rivers. Sometimes most people don't know if their windows are blown out and they have water intrusion and it starts to leak on the interior of the home. Any of these three areas can open up. If you have water intrusion in the hot, humid Florida sun, mold can set in immediately and cause you further damage.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Nancy Peltonen and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce, and we're thrilled to have you with us for our Disaster Recovery Week. It's been a really interesting topics every single day, so you are able to go on our Facebook page to view all of them. We have downloads on our website, greaterpalmbaychamber.com, and so we have a virtual swag bag. You're also able to come into our chamber if you'd like to pick up the actual bag. We have a very nice insulated chamber bag or a canvas one. So if you're out and about, we're at 4100 Dixie Highway Northeast, and we're there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Today I'm very excited because, well, first of all, we will be talking with Jason Lagasca, and he is a government contracts attorney with Widerman Malek. But I do want to give out some shout outs first, because our week sponsor for all of this was PRC, Property Renovations and Construction, and we are bringing this to you in conjunction with the City of Palm Bay. They are very engaged and want to make sure the businesses are planning for any disasters that come up, and we know we're in the middle of hurricane season, so there's checklists in that swag bag and lots of great information. So check it out so you can download some of the great information. We had an insurance conversation, so it has another checklist too for your items to itemize what's in your building. It's hard to remember when you're not there what you lost. So if you plan ahead of time, this is what this is all about: planning ahead of time, getting the information that you should kind of use to prepare, and then should something happen, how to mitigate damages so that you can get back up and running quickly. So thank you once again to PRC. And then we have our gold sponsors, 5-Star Claims Adjusting, Joe Rayleigh with State Farm and Viera Voice. And then we have Morsecom and ServPro of South Brevard County. So we want to thank them. And now I will turn this over to Jason, and he is going to talk about cybersecurity, information that you should really be aware of for your company. As we know, so many get hacked, and there's so many viruses out there. So Jason's going to lead us through what we can do with our businesses to keep us safe. So I'll turn that over to Jason.
Great, thanks, Nancy. I appreciate the introduction. So as Nancy said, what I want to do is I want to talk about cybersecurity today, and much like preparations for hurricane season, as she mentioned, one of the things that we're dealing with during this COVID-19 outbreak or this pandemic are really cybersecurity issues. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is a little bit about our firm. We offer legal and consulting services to small and medium-sized companies that are looking to do business with the government. As government contractors ourselves, we know the difficulties that you may encounter in trying to secure a government contracts. And one of those things is really about compliance. It's following the requests of the government agency, whether it's federal, state, or local, and making sure that you comply with the terms of your contract. And one of the things that most of these governmental agencies are looking for these days are compliance with their cybersecurity protocols. So I give you the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to be another person that's going to sit there and tell you, or at least remind you, that we need to constantly be washing our hands, don't touch your face, practice social distancing, avoid crowds, wear a mask, and anything else that the CDC tells you to do, right? But it's also, during COVID-19, it's really important to practice really good cybersecurity. We have the Internet of Things. What thing that we possess these days is not connected to the internet? There are very few things, if you think about it, that are out there. But what that does is that convenience creates risk. Cyber criminals are out there to take advantage of all things that are on the internet. So next slide, please. So why is this important? Well, it's important because all of us are at risk. Every company, every organization, every agency. Cyber criminals are out there to exploit the employees that will unknowingly or unwittingly click on a link. It also includes subcontractors. So some of you who have small and medium-sized companies that think, well, I'm only a subcontractor. I'm removed from the actual customer, who's the government agency. So I don't really have to worry about cybersecurity, and that's not true. If you have communications with the prime contractor, you are a gateway to that prime contractor and ultimately to that government agency. And that's true for any vendor, any supplier, anybody who works with a government contractor, again, provides a gateway to that government agency, whether, again, it's federal, state, or local. And if you look at it, 2018, the Congressional Small Business Committee found that 71% of the cyber attacks happen at companies that have 100 or less employees. That's a huge number. So you need to be careful about this. And again, if you look at Verizon's data breach investigative report, they say 43% of data breaches are targeted small or medium-sized companies. And this is true because every government agency and every government, and to even a greater level, even the nation itself is at risk. So if you think about it, think about an entity like the U.S. Navy. They're not immune from actually cybersecurity attacks. Go back to 2018 when China attacked, a contractor that was providing services to the U.S. Navy, and U.S. Navy information was compromised as a result of that contractor being compromised. Next slide. So what are we seeing? So during the lockdown, and I've seen tons of these emails and tons of these examples from individuals and companies. Some of our clients have shared some of these emails, some of these attempts to try to get into their system. Now, I'll start with a lot of them are emails. You've probably seen them as an individual. You're going to get the email scams. Unfortunately, there are those unscrupulous individuals that will use COVID-19 to pull at your heartstrings and to get you to click on a link so that they can get into your email account, and they can get compromising and or sensitive information, banking passwords, that kind of thing. So you're going to see lots of these emails. I've seen some pretty good ones from some of my clients, threatening to turn over compromising information. That goes to the second point there, blackmail and ransom. They'll say, hey, I'm going to release some, compromising video of you if you do not send me $1,200 in cryptocurrency. You know, and it's much in line with, if you remember back in 2017, the WannaCry incident. This is where hackers hacked into hundreds of thousands of accounts, and then they encrypted a bunch of files because now they got access to the files, and then they held those files ransom, and they said, you must send me $300, you know, in Bitcoin. You know, you have to send me this money or else I'm going to go ahead and delete these files. You know, and really what those cyber criminals were really able to do is they were able to exploit a Microsoft vulnerability that ended up becoming known as Eternal Blue. What's funny about that is it happened again, Petya, in June of the same year. And I'll talk a little bit about, you know, how we could have prevented something like that in a little bit. But this also goes to business email compromise. I was just talking to a Fortune 100 vice president the other day, and one of the things that he mentioned was that they had been the subject of business email compromise. Somebody had gotten to the CEO's account, had sent an email to the accounting office and said, hey, one of our suppliers has switched bank accounts. So as a result, you need to now send the money to this new account. And the email looked legit. It looked like it came from the boss. So, you know, this person in accounting went ahead and complied with the request of their boss. And unfortunately, it was not a legitimate email, and the money was lost. It was sent to an unauthorized account. And of course, the money, once it got to that new account, disappeared. So you'll see that a lot of that going on. You'll also see phishing. So right now, it's not just the old email from the Nigerian prince asking you for money, you know, or it's not the email, hey, you know, if you help me free up $8.5 million, I'll pay you, you know, $20,000 just for, you know, helping me contact this bank. It's more sophisticated than that. And, you know, cyber criminals are using things like machine learning to actually make things look really legitimate. The other day, I had a client show me an invoice that allegedly had come from one of their suppliers, and it really was a spoof. It was fake. And it was only by contacting the supplier and having the accounting office take a look at it did we realize that it was a spoof. I mean, when we first showed it to the supplier and confronted them and said, hey, you know, why was this invoice sent? They weren't sure. They were like, wow, you know, well, yeah, that looks like one of our invoices. And then they had to pull the string a little bit and take a look at it. And I mean, it was that convincing. It even had kind of fooled their accounting office. Data theft is another one. I mean, so, you know, people are always struggling with identity theft. And then, you know, cyber espionage. I mean, there's, you know, all sorts of examples of people hacking into systems and just doing, you know, nefarious acts just because they can. You know, there are those individuals that will go in and just wreak havoc to someone's infrastructure just because they can gain access to the system. Next slide. So what do? So some of the best practices, at least that I've seen throughout my career in the government and as a consultant and, you know, with the Treasury Department are, you know, some of these simple things: policy, you know, cyber hygiene, you know, education and training, cybersecurity assessment, and then plan for remote and mobile devices. Now, I want you to note one thing on this slide. I have that icon there, and it shows circular motion, and it's because these things are continuous. It's not one of those things where you, okay, I put a policy in place and then I forget about it, or one time I check my system one time, you know, have somebody come in and do assessment for me. It's a one-time thing. This is a continuous process. So cybersecurity is just not, you know, it doesn't go on automatic pilot. It isn't, you know, hey, fire and forget, and you know, I don't have to do this again. It is a continuous process. But I'll address each one of these in the following slides. Next slide, please. All right, so policy, what am I talking about? Well, a system security plan is the first thing that you want to take a look at. What are some of the things that you need to be aware of? You know, what are some of the things that you need to be mindful of when you are actually trying to protect your data? You know, where do you host the data? What kind of computers do you have? What kind of server do you have? Do you use a cloud service? So you need to have a plan that addresses everything and all of the things that you use or do with data, especially if you're working for a government agency. I mean, because, or even if you have commercial customers, one of the things you're going to be worried about is you're going to be worried about what happens to their data. okay? And you don't want to be in a position where something happens to your customer's data. You also need to establish standard operating procedures. So for your employees, for companies that actually have several employees, even a couple employees, you need to tell them what to do. If they spot one of those emails that looks suspicious, who do they notify? What do they do with it? If they don't know what to do with it, there's a problem. And you look at Semantics, report there, it talks about 1 in 323 emails in 2019, to small and medium-sized businesses were malicious. So that's problematic. And the number is probably higher today. I mean, I would say with everybody working remotely from their homes, it's a field day for the cyber criminals. So you'll probably see, once they publish statistics for 2020, that number is probably much higher. Next slide. So cyber hygiene, okay? What am I talking about? This is not, again, a fire and forget or goes on automatic pilot. This is something that is continuous. So for the first thing that I want to talk about is passwords. I know it. Everybody hates them, but you need to change them, and you need to change them with the frequency. If your password is the word password, we have some problems. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we also have some problems. So it should be something that is not going to be easily broken. I mean, again, with the use of machine learning, cyber criminals can break your password if it is a simple word or a simple string of characters or whatnot. So you're going to want to make it somewhat difficult. Some of the guidance that I've seen out there is to make it a sentence, like I like, a certain type of food, and it might be something like that, and make sure that, that it contains capital letters, it contains lowercase letters, it contains numbers, it contains symbols. So the more random it becomes and something that's easy for you to remember, the stronger and the harder it is for your system to be hacked via password. Again, if you look at Verizon's report there, 63% of the breaches were the result of lost, weak, or stolen passwords. I mean, that's a daunting statistic, and it's just something so simple, something simple that could be simply addressed. Firewalls. If you have firewalls, don't disable them. I mean, I know now with a lot of employees working remotely, there's some difficulties working with certain apps and certain applications, and firewalls sometimes get in the way, but they're there for a reason. I mean, they're the barrier. They're the kind of your first line of defense. They will keep out a lot of the malware that may enter your system and just do, or wreak havoc. So, you want to make sure that your firewalls are enabled. Anti-malware, again, that their job is to detect and protect your system. So you want to use anti-malware. Software updates and patches. This is a big one. So I mentioned earlier the WannaCry incident, back in 2017. What was interesting about that was the patch that would have prevented exploitation of Eternal Blue was actually released in March of 2017. And if you recall from the previous slide, WannaCry didn't happen until much later that year, and Petya again happened. It was in May, and then Petya happened in June. So, but the patch was out there. So the individuals that fell victim to exploitation or fell victim to cyber criminals was because they didn't apply the patch that was out there already. Multi-factor identification, huge. This one's a big one. And I mean, I hear cybersecurity professionals say this all the time. It's part of that whole defense in layers. If you have multi-factor, or at least two levels of multi-factor identification in place, it helps. And again, I think analogy I provided in the past was it's much like a castle. You have the castle walls, but they also have the moat. So it's, again, defense in layers. You want to think about it in that manner, and then back up your data. Again, if somebody comes in and does encrypt some of your files, and you're unable to, or you can't for whatever reason, retrieve or free up the data, you're going to want to make sure that you have access to it, because if they do, just because they're committing cyber espionage, delete your files, that becomes problematic. And how are you going to operate and perform work for some of your customers, again, whether they're commercial or government? Next slide. All right, education and training. This is a big one. I mean, and this should be an annual event for your employees. I mean, you want to make sure that they understand the threat. You want to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to do. Because again, with the evolution of technology, connected watches, I mean, that those can be exploited. Phones, laptops, I mean, refrigerators. How many of us have seen that commercial where you could sit there and go to the grocery store and figure out what you have in your refrigerator because it's connected? Webcams, garage doors. I mean, the commercial where it shows the family leaving the house, and then the son, closes the garage door because they forgot to close the garage door. Cooktops, believe it or not, we have one where you can download an app, and I'm not really sure under what circumstances you'd want to turn that on, but I guess I could remotely turn on my cooktop. Medical devices, so again, everything is connected to the internet, and it can become problematic. So employees need to be aware, pop-ups, they want to make sure that they're using secure Wi-Fi, especially now that they're home. I mean, the likelihood that they're probably going to go out and tap into a public Wi-Fi is small, but you want to make sure that they understand, hey, you shouldn't be doing company's business, at the local Starbucks because, that Wi-Fi system may not be secure. And then you want to let them know about phishing scams. I mean, some people, have been fortunate enough not to have been reached or contacted by cyber criminals. So you want to make sure that they know what's out there, what are the dangers. And it always just kind of works like neighborhood watch. You want to make sure that more eyes are looking at the issue, that they're protecting not only your company's best interest, but those of your customer. And then again, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that if they are not sure what they're supposed to do, they know to ask. I mean, not to sit there and go, well, I'll just click on this link and, explore on my own, or take the chance that I can, fix this problem myself. So again, education and training is key. Next slide. Cybersecurity assessment. So as a company, I would not rely on self-assessment. I mean, the issue with self-assessment is that, unless you're an IT professional, I would not rely on that assessment. So you're going to want to get an objective opinion from somebody else, an expert. Have them come in and take a look at everything. Have them take a look at your infrastructure. Have them take a look at your hardware. Have them take a look at what software you're using. Have them take a look at your policies. Maybe have them take a look at your practices. If somebody falls victim to malware, or something along those lines happens, what do you do? What are they supposed to do? Better that now instead of after you've lost data, right? And again, with those of you that are government contractors, it becomes problematic because the government's going to want some answers, or they're going to ask you to shut down your system. And if your system isn't segregated, that could pose problems for you because you basically can't work. The same thing's going to happen if you lose, say, a commercial customer's data. I mean, what kind of repercussions will that lead to? So again, it's better that you have some sort of assessment done to know about the vulnerabilities of your infrastructure before it actually gets exploited. And again, there's a statistic here that talks about on average, you're talking about $3 million for small and medium-sized businesses, that fall prey to a cyber attack. Next slide, please. All right, so all of us have been working remotely. I mean, I had to do it for during the lockdown. I think most of us have had to do it. We have a lot more employees these days that are teleworking as part of their employment contract. Sometimes they may have to telework because they're working as part of a government contract and they're not allowed in the facility, or it's restricted access. Illness is another reason why you may have that key personnel that may have to work remotely. So teleworking is a big deal. Travel, when you have some of those key personnel or certain employees that are required to travel as part of their duties, I mean, they're going to be working remotely. So you've got to have these plans in place for them. Disaster preparedness, I mean, kind of the reason why we're having this discussion. Hurricanes, first one up there, this pandemic that we're going through right now, and then other national security, if we have another 9/11. These are all things that we may have to continue to work under the current circumstances. What we're dealing with right now may become the new norm. How long? I mean, if we decide to go into another lockdown, can your company still perform and still maintain cybersecurity protocols? Again, this is something that you're going to need to take a look at. And like I mentioned there earlier, two things that work for or at least I've seen work for most companies or most of my clients, is that two-factor authentication and then use of a virtual private network to make sure that, again, your communications are secure and that you're protecting the data of your customers. Next slide, please. And for those of you that are government contractors, I just wanted to talk about CMMC. For those of you that aren't familiar, this is the Department of Defense's attempts to update cybersecurity protocols because they've fallen prey to foreign adversaries and those ne'er-do-wells, people that just want to get in to see if they can hack the Pentagon or a certain service. So the Department of Defense wants to upgrade their cybersecurity protocols. And what they're doing is they're going through and they're taking industry standards, they're consulting with academia, they're also consulting with industry. And the interesting part is that most of the attacks are actually focused on contractors because, again, they're the most vulnerable. So it's easier for cyber criminals to actually go after contractors instead of maybe taking on one of the military branches or another branch of the federal government. So now one of the things that is currently out there is the Nist 800-171 controls. It's the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and they put out some standards several years ago that are still right now pretty much the gold standard for at a minimum. If you have these controls in place, you will be in compliance. And one of the things that I've seen with a lot of the updates on the cybersecurity model maturation certification program, that's what CMMC stands for, is that, maintain your standards right now. I mean, a lot of people are worried about, well, how much is this going to cost me? This sounds like it's going to be expensive. Am I going to have to comply before I can bid on government contracts? And yes, there's going to be certain standards that are required of contractors in order to bid on contracts. But they've also said that for the most part, a large majority of contractors that are out there that are going to bid on government contracts are probably only going to be level 1. There are 5 levels under the CMMC. And level 1 is pretty much the NIST 800-171 standard. So if you're pretty much in compliance right now, you're probably going to be okay. And it's probably going to be for just those few contracts. They were saying of the 300,000 potential government contractors that are out there, probably only 15,000 or so are probably going to require anything above a level 1 certification. So again, nothing to stress about until a later date. Bring in a third-party assessor early. This was the comment I made earlier about a cybersecurity assessment. Have somebody come in. It's always good to kind of know about your vulnerabilities now and to find out whether or not you're even in compliance with 800-171. Like I said earlier, I'm not an IT professional. I know enough to sit there and say, okay, here's a problem, here's potential vulnerability, and then I have to seek the assistance of experts to help me either fix it or decide what needs to be, how you mitigate the risk. You also need to start working with your CFO. I mean, obviously, some people are concerned that this could cost a lot of money. Well, true, there may be some costs associated with it if you're going after some of those higher level contracts. And again, you're going to have to create a budget for it and set aside funds if you're going to go after some of those contract opportunities. Don't forget that your system security plan needs to include the non-technical controls. So it's that piece of the education and training that's non-technical. You need to have proof that your employees went through some sort of training. Keep records. Looks like Department of Defense right now is working on the change to the DFARS. That's the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. Those are regulations that are specific to the Department of Defense. And then if you're worried about the requirements for being compliant with CMMC, DoD has already said that those requirements won't come out in contracts or in RFPs until a rule change is completed. So again, that's going to be some time out. CMMC should probably be phased in sometime around 2026 completely. So that's still some time. Again, there's the advisory board or accreditation board is actually working on all of the standards, and they're working on how third-party assessors are going to come in and certify you. So there's still some time to still get prepared. So in the interim, for those of you that are concerned, the best thing to do is to start ensuring that you are in compliance with the Nist 800-171 standard. And then, once you do get your certification from CMMC AB, that certification will be valid for 3 years. So that's in a nutshell are the the updates so far from CMMC and the Department of Defense. Again, cybersecurity, it's a continuous process. If you have questions about compliance or any other issues, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I mean, we help with all manner of government contracting issues. What's required to become a government contractor. If you're thinking about that, how do you register to become a government contractor? Where do you find the opportunities? Compliance issues like the cybersecurity, and all manner of issues surrounding government contracts. So if you have anything, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me.
Well, thank you. That was awesome, Jason. And I know the information is going to be well received. And for those of you that didn't hear the introduction at the beginning, Jason Lagasca is the government contracts attorney for Widerman Malek. So he's an expert, and we are thrilled. This is one of our topics for Disaster Recovery Week. We are having every day different panelists on. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and you can see the live stream on Facebook. We also have our swag bag. So for information from the different topics, you can download checklists on preparing your business. There's insurance checklists to make sure you do an inventory for your business should anything happen. I know that there's also 5-star claims adjusting, and they have where you can have them come to your business free of charge, and they'll look at, or your home, they'll look at what your building is like and kind of give you the standard, so that should something happen, they can prove that it was in good order before a hurricane or before a disaster, so that the insurance company can't say it was a pre-existing, almost like condition of your property. So there's a lot of great information, so make sure you check out the swag bag. I also want to thank the City of Palm Bay, because they have been our partners for this week, and they are very concerned about the business community and wanted to make sure that we had a disaster recovery expo so that we could talk about the various important things for businesses to be aware of, especially since we're already in hurricane season. And we did have one of the days has our hurricane expert, and he was speaking about the history of hurricanes, also kind of giving predictions for this year. And I think before the season really even started, there were like 3 named storms, and so I think we're going to have an active summer this year. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, which is PRC, that's Property Renovations and Construction. We have our gold sponsor, 5-star Claims Adjusting, Joe Raley, State Farm, and Vera Voice, and then our silver sponsors, Morse Com and Serve Pro. So I cannot thank you enough, Jason, for joining me today. This was fabulous. And if people have questions, if you'd like to put them into the Facebook page, and we will make sure that you get answers.